Welcome to the SAMA Podcast, where we talk to the most experienced people in B2B to find answers to one simple question. How can you become and remain essential to your strategic customers? Tune in as our guests reveal what it takes to become the supplier they cannot afford to lose. Learn how to level up your account management strategies to promptly deliver speed, convenience, and success to each customer. Let's jump into the discussion right now.
Welcome to the Executive Conversation, a SAMA podcast. My name is Gordon Galzerano, and I'm President and CEO of SAMA. And throughout the Executive Conversation series, we're going to be investing time with industry CEOs and executives, all with the purpose of understanding how they're evolving their business in support of the customers they serve. And today, I'm thrilled because we're kicking off a special three-part series where we're going to get inside the mind of today's executive buyer. And my guest for this three-part series is Jacques Sciammas, President of Selling to Executives and a longtime partner to and advocate of the Strategic Account Management Association. What's unique about Jacques is he brings a rare yet powerful lens to this conversation. He's played the role and has sat on both sides of the table as CFO and COO for global corporations across industries, and is now a trusted advisor to the C-suite buyers around the world. So over the next three segments or episodes, we're going to take a closer look at how executives think, how the C-suite is evolving, and how you can better prepare for the conversations that really move the needle at the highest levels within your customer's organization, irrespective of your role, irrespective of the function with which you reside in. So today we're going to focus on the C-suite itself, how it's evolving, which new roles are gaining influence as stakeholders are growing, not shrinking, relative to decision-making and the process, and what that means for strategic sellers navigating complex buying terms. So with that, let's dive in. Jacques, it is so great to see you again. Welcome to the SAMA podcast.
Gordon, it's a pleasure to be here. And, working with SAMA has been a pleasure all along. And having this conversation with me is just a pleasure.
Yeah, and I think it goes without saying with your longstanding role within the SAMA community and the partnerships that you've created. I was thinking back this morning to, my first kind of indoctrination to SAMA as a community was back in 2002 when I was with Cisco Systems. And I believe you were one of the first executives that I met back in those early days. And so I know with a longstanding heritage and leadership that you've exemplified, without question, it's created tremendous value for us. And I want to thank you for that and also thank you for today.
Thanks, Gordon. It's a two-way street because when I participate with a lot of the SAMA events, I'm getting a lot of information, value, insights from the peers over there who are in the SAMA community. So it's a win-win across the board. So thank all the SAMA community as well for me.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Well, I thought, would be important, Jacques, is look, we're kind of in this really unique time, these times of uncertainty, if you will. And in the conversations that I'm having with other CEOs and executives, I'm beginning to have a deeper appreciation and empathy for what that all means. But I'd love to hear from you on this, as we're kind of navigating these geopolitical and economic headwinds, and they are as well, both in terms of within their own organizations and the customers and partners and ecosystems that they serve. What are executives thinking about most? How are they responding to these times of uncertainty?
Well, I may say the short answer is we're not responding right now fast enough, which means we are on hold. As you point out, it's interesting times and unusual times in terms of geopolitical, economic, whether it's the tariffs or the wars or anything else relating to what can happen to my suppliers, my customers, my business in general. So people are not sure. You may have seen a lot of the surveys that talk about the CEOs being optimistic and then now becoming extremely cautious and holding back on investments because they don't know whether they can afford it or not. They don't know if their customers will be with them, if they're going to grow or if they're going to lose a lot of them. So they're on a very high security mode in terms of let's see what happens, hoping it happens, because you can't do nothing for a long time and survive or grow. And I think right now you have one that is a caution. Basically, it's a lot of caution from the executives. They're waiting to see if they have more visibility. The worst thing we like is uncertainty. And that's where we are today. There's a lot of uncertainty. And as a result, we're trying to figure out what's the best path in order to reduce and mitigate the risks in the business.
Got it. You know, I think that's so true. And you know, one of the things that we've been talking about a lot just within kind of the executive suite as part of the SAMA member community is I think you're right. I think uncertainty, and then of course, if you're publicly held, then it's the unpredictable nature of your business and how that might be creating caution within Wall Street and that community as well, because that uncertainty is really making it difficult for Wall Street to understand where organizations are going and how they're going to get there. So when we think about it from the buyer side, the executives like yourself and others that sit on that side of the table, what can the vendors or the suppliers do in response to that? The sellers and the marketers and folks that are customer touching, customer facing, what's your guidance to them on the things that they should be thinking about and do? Please.
From the vendor's point of view, supplier's point of view, they should do what they should have been doing all along. Basically showing me the value of what they're proposing, regardless of the economic environment, and how the risk is mitigated. So maybe I will not get the full benefits if there's some action on the political front, but I will get a good part of the benefits. Now, the worst case scenario is if I do nothing. So when I chaired the capital committee that made the decisions, we usually had 4 choices: advance with the ones presenting to us, advance with competitors, do something internally if we could, or do nothing at all. The do nothing was about 80% of the time. And the big reason why there was the do nothing is because either there wasn't enough value, enough compelling value, and the other one was basically too much risk. And the risk wasn't mitigated enough. Right now, what you have is you may have the value, but you have much higher risk. So the balance shifts a little bit. But it doesn't mean we can't do anything. We can't do the no action because we're not paid to do nothing. The other, we have the challenge of the uncertainty, but we also have the challenge that if we don't do something and our competitors do, they're going to go ahead and they're going to win our business and our customers. So, and you mentioned the analysts on Wall Street. You can go on and on. So you got to juggle quite a few things. But from the vendor perspective, you got to focus on these 2 things: the added value and the lower risk.
And, I was thinking also, Jacques, as you were just talking, it was reflecting back on, we've had other inflection points over the last 25, 30 years where uncertainty was paramount, whether that was in the IT industry with the implosion of the .com providers and that part of the industry. We've obviously recently, in the last 5 years, experienced COVID, where these were not just regional disruptions, these were global disruptions, and it's very much like it is today. And what executives are telling me is they want more than ever for their vendors, their suppliers, their ecosystem partners to get closer to them and to have an empathy for what they're going through, some of the things that you already talked about, and now how are they adapting and thinking about their business during these times of uncertainty? Because what you said is true. If we don't, our competitors will. And I remember back when we were in the early 2000s going through this transition, coming out of the .com issues, John Chambers, our president and CEO at the time, said there's never a better time to get closer to your customers than during times of uncertainty. They may not be purchasing right now, or those purchases may be more latent and taking longer. but it's with the purpose of getting close, staying close, and to your point earlier, creating new streams of value that create differentiation. Because when they do turn the business back on and start operating as usual, they're going to remember you for that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree that you have to be very close to your customer in good times and bad times. I remember my ex-boss at Charles Schwab. He used to say you can always tell a good management how they perform in bad times. In good times, everybody looks good. The wind is on your side, the wind is on your side, you're looking great. But it's when really you get into bad situations, how do you manage? And that's what's going to make the difference between the winners and the not so winners, let's call them that. You can also add, back to the .com and then to digital transformation, all the initiatives. You get another factor that is implicit in the digital transformation that's causing a lot of uncertainty. And as you know, that's AI. Huge amount of uncertainty. When they polled the CEOs of the billion-plus company, the billion-dollar-plus companies, when they polled them, their number one concern was basically how well they execute the digital strategy that they set up. They're very comfortable with their strategy. They're very uncomfortable with the execution. So when you layer that on top of everything else going on in the geopolitical environment, that just adds another layer of uncertainty. I go back to say the vendors, the suppliers, they have to figure out how to make me more comfortable, and they got to be close to me. A lot of people think, well, budgets are cut, so we can't really get anything from talking to our clients. That's just the opposite. You want to be there to help me on my side in good and bad times, because I'll remember who was on my side when things were bad.
Yeah. Great. Sage advice. Really appreciate that. And I think that validates a lot of the way other executives are thinking about it as well. So it is during those difficult times when there's never a better time to get closer and look to ways to create value and help them ride through those waves of uncertainty. Let's maybe pivot a little bit now to kind of, you've seen so much change, especially in the C-suite over the last 3 to 5 to 10 years, as decision-making has shifted, new personas have come online, chief security officers and chief revenue officers and other naming conventions that weren't necessarily in place, let's say 10 years ago. That's now evolving. What are you seeing, Jacques, and how is that C-suite not only evolving, but how is that decision-making changing?
I think there are probably two things that are changing or have changed in the last 3 to 5 years. I would limit it to 3 to 5 for now.
Okay.
I think one, the C-suite has expanded. So there are more players, more decision makers, more influencers. So if you look at people who report to the CEO of the big companies, there are more direct reports than before. That's not by accident. That's by design and based on everything that happened. So there are more people reporting to the CEO, which means there are also conflicting responsibilities. If I were the chief revenue officer and I had somebody coming in as a chief digital officer, a chief head of sales, or another chief that wasn't here before, that's kind of like I have to figure out what is my role, what is his or her role. So one, it's a bigger village. You have more players involved in the decision making. I think Forrester basically said that on average, when you talk about a big deal, minimum of 4 CXOs are involved, 4 of them. It could involve the CEO or not, but it definitely involves a few. It's not a one person making the decision. So more players, and we'll talk about the more players, but also the ones who had the existing roles, like the traditional roles, CEO, CFO, COO, CMO, CIO, CTO, the traditional roles have expanded their roles. So you think that they have less to do, but just the opposite. They actually have more to do. So if you look at some of the strategic offsites, now you see people who didn't go there before go to the strategic offsite with the CEO and with the consulting firms. It used to be pretty much the CEO, CFO, and the McKinseys, the Brewers, Allen, all these guys who go in for about a week and they decide what is the strategy for the company in the next 3 to 5 years. Today, one, we kind of limited to 3 years because things are changing so fast. And two, more people from the C-suite are going to those meetings. So the CEO is involved a lot more in strategy. The CFO is more involved in strategy as well. Obviously the CEO, but there are more people who have broader roles. The CIO, CTO, they're more involved in the business. So more involvement in terms of my role, my existing role has expanded and new roles have popped up.
So I'm sure to those that are customer facing and they're thinking about obviously always trying to move up and over to create more value within their customer's organization, we just called out several personas that maybe not only are the traditional ones, but now these ones that are net new and their responsibilities and decision-making now is decentralized, et cetera, et cetera. What's your guidance and coaching to those customer-facing leaders and sellers with so many CX level folks now in the mix? How do you know which ones to target and prioritize?
Well, let's start by the more CXOs you target, the better, if they're relevant or involved in the decision making. Assume that just about if it's a big deal, all the C-suite will be involved because there's a committee of C-suite executives who decide on the big investments, and whether they're directly implicated, they may be in the meeting and decide. That's one. So if I were to say, well, but tell me who is the most, let's start with the most important executive. The most important executive that you need to get to is not necessarily the most senior, okay? It's not the CEO if it's a big deal. It's the person who's most impacted by whatever you're proposing. So it's the person who's got the most to gain or the most to lose. We're talking about why we didn't make decisions because of risk. What they have to show that executive is the risk of not doing something, the risk of not going with them. So that's what scares us. And of course, the value that they bring to that executive and his or her role and objectives. So they need to target the key person, the person whose KPIs are most tied to the proposal. And they need to target also, I may add one more person. In every committee that decides on strategic investments, there's a chairman or chairwoman of that committee. So it doesn't mean that person has more decision-making power, but still influences the group. Think of it as the jury member who kind of organizes everything. So the chair of that committee is key too. And it doesn't mean it's the most senior person. It just is a member of the committee. You should know who's the chairman of the capital committee, and you should know who is the key person who is impacted by your proposal. Either impacted good or impacted bad if it doesn't happen. Those are the two key executives. Having said that, you got to touch upon all the other executives who may be implicated or influencing. Because as I said, it's a collective decision. So if you're talking to if you think of, does your solution help the CMO, the chief marketing officer? Does it bring him or her more customers? Does it retain more customers? Does it bring more share of wallet? Ask all these questions to yourself. If any of those is yes, you got to get to that person, get them on your side. Because when a decision is made, they're going to think, oh, look, there's something in it for me. I'm going to vote for you type of thing. Or I want to continue working with you. If it relates to technology and you have scale on your side, you have simplicity on your side, you have agility on your side, you have cost, all that stuff, make sure the CIO or CTO is, you touched upon that person and convince them of what's in it for them. So all of these.
One of the things that really stands out in what you said, Jacques, was focusing on the executive that's most impacted. And I don't know that traditional sellers or customer facing leaders think of it in those terms. They always think about the stakeholders and those who are the influencers and have decision-making authority, especially when it comes to, who writes the check, so to speak, or processes the PO and procurement. But this mindset shift of understanding, do we know who truly is most directly impacted by the decision? And imagining then the power that they have and the influence that they have and where we can help them understand and make the case for change internally, because there are others that also weigh into that decision. I think that's a really interesting call out. So I took a note of those most impacted. I think also is a great lens with which we should look through when we're calling on that executive buyer. So you mentioned earlier about, sorry, go ahead, please.
And Gordon, one of the things I suggest to sales leaders and salespeople is to basically get the org chart of the company. See who are the top executives, CEO down 1-2 levels. And if you're selling to a division or a sub, do the same thing. And basically map it out. Look at that executive, look at their key responsibility, their KPIs, look at their challenges, their pains. So research each one of them. And then look at your proposal, look at your solution, and ask yourself, does that affect them in any way at all, directly or indirectly, the before and the after? Imagine yourself that you're only presenting to them, and they're the only decision maker. They're the only one who will decide on your proposal. You have to convince them to be on your side. What's in it for them? And map it out and see what comes out of it. If nothing comes out of it, then they're probably not that relevant, or you haven't thought it enough. But
so, Jacques,
executive.
Yeah. And what you're really touching on, I think, is important. One of the things that I've seen over and over again, if we look at it, from an aggregate perspective, oftentimes salespeople in particular really don't spend a whole lot of time in discovery. And that's really what you're describing, is really digging into, from an organizational map perspective, who they are, what functions they lead, what their priorities, initiatives, outcomes, and KPIs are, getting to that next level of not just professional agenda, but what's their personal agenda, which oftentimes plays a big role, as you know all too well. In the old days, let's say, we used to listen to earnings calls and look at financial statements and 10Ks and so forth to really try to dig out insights. But now with the technology landscape and the proliferation of AI and technology tools, that discovery has now become much easier. What are you seeing in terms of a shift to using some of the tools that are out there today around discovery and to get to the answers to the tests that you were describing?
So that's a very valid point, because technology has advanced so fast that we have a lot more insight and information than before. But that's a two-way street, which means we, the executives, have it as well, not just the suppliers and the vendors and the salespeople. So we're doing a lot of research on what's good for us as well. And you got to also do the research on what's good for us from our point of view. And you mentioned things like the earnings call and the 10K. Unfortunately, most leaders are not doing that. They should do the basics, but they should augment it and complement it with everything that's available now with AI, and basically figure out, why is it such a good idea for me to invest with you? And you got to be prepared.
Yeah, no question. I was going to ask it because I oftentimes, the narrative is, look, I'm not a financial expert. So the notion of calling on as high as the CFO or someone within the finance function, I don't have the confidence. I don't know the nomenclature as well as somebody who has a finance background. And therefore, I'm more hesitant to want to get in harm's way for fear I don't understand. But The feedback I'm getting, and I'd love to hear from you, is what executives really want is for people to try. Like do some of the foundational homework. You don't have to be a finance expert, but at least have an empathy for what I'm trying to do in the business and what I'm accountable to. Just like they're not an expert in your business, so it now creates to you, what you said earlier, a two-way street where we can have a meaningful dialogue to help educate one another. Don't come in with a blank sheet of paper, but come in at least with a point of view. And then from that point of view, we can work from that. Is that consistent with your expectations?
Very much so. I think you hit it on the head when you said we don't expect you to be an expert, whether it's a finance expert or a technology expert or an operation expert. We really don't expect you to be any expert at all, unless you're supposed to be the expert, of course. But we really expect you to have done the research that's public information, at least, that your competitor probably has done. So we don't want to really invest our time to really educate you on stuff that you can find out on your own. That's just basic common sense. If you don't put in the energy and the effort to do that minimal preparation, as I call it, then probably you're not serious enough and we can't trust you in the future. That's one. The second thing is that you got to come in with stuff that we don't know. Because if you tell me stuff I know, there's no value at all to me. I'm looking for stuff that I can't find through AI. I can't find through my research. I can't find through talking to different people. I want to know stuff that you know that will help me, that will help advance for you and advance for me. And that's the stuff we're looking for. And you should not be shy at all to share that information. Now, if it's not very useful to me, we'll have a discussion. But at least you'll have tried to help us.
Jacques, you were talking earlier about clearly the proliferation of the number of personas that are decision makers now. That number has grown. You also mentioned earlier conflicting responsibilities, which I thought was an interesting dynamic too for us to consider. So as much as we're talking about discovery using external resources, as an executive, a former CFO, COO, what are your expectations of folks coming in and providing insights from maybe the left hand or the right hand, other functions, because oftentimes they're siloed? And do you get perceived value when your vendors or partners come in and might share something that's going on in marketing or something that's going on in the supply chain or procurement aspects of your business that perhaps, so these are more internal insights. Do you get value from those?
Yes, and I would say from the vendor perspective, don't worry about the political aspect. That's a little bit of our problem or our job. Worry about putting on the table what's in it for him and for her and for me. Just put it out there. Let us fight for it. But put it out there. Just show me the bottom of the iceberg, and maybe I don't agree with everything below the iceberg being good for me, but we're going to fight that out on our own. Even when we get into decisions of, final decision-making of vendor, we don't always agree. That sometimes can slow down the sales cycle, fair enough, but not that often. We're usually on the same page and we know what's best for the company and then maybe what's best for our division, our group, our role. And you got to think similarly. You got to think, well, I'm going to show them there's so much value to the company that, the stuff that we don't agree on is not going to be key. It will dwarf those small things. Quite often the sales cycle is long because the gap between vendor number one and vendor number two is not big enough. And we don't want to make the wrong decision of which one to go with. So we wait and the cycle extends and we try to widen that gap. So from your end, if you got a really big value to us, bring it up. And that's going to help advance the deal and shorten the sales cycle.
Got it. Well, I know we're coming up on time in this first segment. Jacques, any closing guidance that you would provide to our listeners today?
Yeah, I come back and I say, put yourself in the shoes of your client, in their industry, in their company, in their role, and put yourself in each one of these CXO's shoes, not just one. And be aware of the new roles that have popped up. As you mentioned, you have the Chief Digital Officer, the Chief Sustainability Officer, the Chief Data Officer, the Chief Customer Officer. All these are new roles that some of them are reporting directly to the CEO, some of them one level down, but all of them were brought into the company for a reason. And the reason is they're going to basically do stuff that's supposed to help the company, bringing value, including working with vendors and suppliers to find out what's best for them. So target every single CXO, find out who are the most impacted, and make sure that you show them the value and you reduce the risk for them and for the whole company.
That's great advice. Jacques, thank you. I know we've covered a lot of ground about the evolving makeup of the C-suite and how sellers and others that are customer facing have to tailor their approach to different executive roles and priorities. And I love starting with those that are most impacted. That's really sage advice. So to our listeners, thank you for listening. And in part two, we're going to step inside the C-suite further to explore how executives think, what moves them to act, and how the best salespeople in particular can earn their trust. And it's going to be a conversation about influence. It's going to be about value, and it's going to be about speaking the language of leadership in their language, in their nomenclature, and getting outside of our head with the acronyms that we use all too often. So we'll see you in segment number 2.
Thank you, Gordon, and thank you, everybody. I look forward to segment 2.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope today's wisdom will lead you down the path of experiencing success in your profession. Remember, the key to successful strategic account management is discovering where your customer wants to go and helping them get there. Subscribe to our podcasts at strategicaccounts.org. We hope you'll leave a positive rating and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. If there's something we can do to improve our podcasts, please let us know. That's all for today. See you on the next one.